In the last some lectures, I have showed you how you can prepare a data source for your Excel pivot table. In this lecture, I will show you how you can create a pivot table in step-by-step procedure. In the screen, you are seeing the same data that we are working with from the start of this course. Let's start creating a basic pivot table using this data. To create a pivot table from a dataset, at first select any cell within that dataset. I select a cell within this data table. Now in the Insert tab and in the Tables group of commands, you will get two commands related to pivot table. First one is pivot table and the second one is recommended pivot tables. Recommended pivot tables command is added in Excel 2013. Let's check what pivot tables Excel recommends for this data table. Excel recommends a good number of pivot tables on the left side of the recommended pivot tables dialog box. Select a pivot table and you will see the preview of the pivot table on the right side of the dialog box. On the bottom left corner of the dialog box, you will find two options: blank pivot table and change source data. If I click on change source data, choose data source dialog box appears where you can input a new data source. I cancel the dialog box. Now I click on blank pivot table button. A new worksheet is created and a blank pivot table is created in the worksheet. I delete the worksheet as I will reach this worksheet in different way. I open again the Insert tab and this time I click on the pivot table command. Create pivot table dialog box appears. Create pivot table dialog box has three parts. In the upper part, you will choose the data that you want to analyze. You can choose data from three different sources: from a table or range, or you can use an external data source, or you can use the data model if your workbook has any. In the table or range field, you see Excel intelligently selects the entire dataset that we are going to analyze. In the middle part of the dialog box, you will choose where you want to place your pivot table. You can place the pivot table in a new worksheet or an existing worksheet. If you choose existing worksheet, then set the cell in this field. But I always prefer to create my pivot tables in a new worksheet, so I choose new worksheet. In the lower part of the dialog box, you can choose whether you want to analyze multiple tables. I shall work with this option later. Now I just click OK. In a new worksheet, a blank pivot table is created. On the right side of the worksheet, Pivot Table Fields task pane appears where you can add data fields to four areas: filters, columns, rows, and values. This window shows all the data fields of the data source. I think you can recall that data fields means the columns of the data table. At the end of the list, you get a control named as More Tables. This pivot table is working with one data table. You will work with this control when you will want to add more data tables to your pivot table. I click on it. Create a new pivot table dialog box appears. The dialog box has come with a message whether I want to create a new pivot table. The reason is when you will use multiple tables in your pivot table, a new pivot table needs to be created using the data model. I click on No. Later, I will show how you can create a pivot table using multiple tables. You can search here a data field using its label. Say, I want to check whether this list has sales amount data field. I type sale. You see, sale amount data field is showing. The search option is useful when you are working with 100 or 1000 of data fields. Here, there is a little control to change the layout of this task pane. I click on it. By default, Fields section and Areas sections is stacked. This option is selected. On the left side of the option, you see a little image that shows the orientation of the data fields and areas in the task pane. This upper zone represents data fields and these four little boxes represent four areas. Next option is Fields section and Areas section side by side. I choose this option. The layout of the task pane changes. Fields section and areas section are sitting side by side in the task pane. Next option is Fields section only. I choose this. The task pane is now only showing the list of the fields. Or you can show only the areas in the task pane. Choose the next option, Areas section only, 2 by 2. Now if I choose the last option, Areas section only, 1 by 4, the areas are showing in 4 rows. There are 6 more options here. I shall talk about them in relevant lectures. Now I choose the first option again, Fields section and Areas section stacked. So we get back to our default layout. I am going to finish this lecture here. In the next lecture, I will talk on the following topics: how you can add data fields to Areas section, how you can add layers to a pivot table report, how you can rearrange a pivot table, and how you can create a filter to an Excel pivot table report.